And boom, we are live. Welcome to Tokyo Tonight 2. Sorry I couldn't make it last week. I was feeling a bit crook. I'd been playing some rugby and I kind of hurt my neck, pinched a nerve. So I was like this. I was kind of stuck. It probably would have worked if I just sat this way all last week. Got a bit of a winter has started in earnest in Japan, which means I've got a bit of a croaky throat at the moment, but that's all okay. It's been an interesting 2 weeks. It's good to see you all. Quinn Rankid, indeed, boom, good to see you, as well as Sergeant Bilko, Steve from Berkeley, good morning to you. Keen Biko, boom. Also, I got this cool plugin, actually, which, oh, you know what, I didn't feature in the topics for tonight, but what's it even called? It's called this for Chrome called Fox Clocks. And it lets you put a whole bunch of like different world clocks at the bottom of the screen. So by that, for example, I know that right now it's 8:30 a.m. in New York, it's 5:38 Pacific time in the US, it's 1:30 p.m. in London, 9:30 at night in Singapore, and 2:30 in the morning in New Zealand. So good to see you all. And it looks like, hey, it's great to see such a good turnout. We've got Milchband, good to see you, and we are live now. You tried, well, it worked. Tai Nakamura, boom, good to see you. Yasa, good to see you. The JVlog 07, yes, good to see you. Welcome everybody. So it's kind of funny, there aren't a lot of topics, but there are some big topics, of course. The main one being the arrest of Carlos Ghosn and what's going on with that. Now, to tell you the truth, I have not been reading every single story about that, but I think I've got a good grasp of the story and an opinion to share about it. So I'm going to go through with that and see where we end up. And some other topics of stuff going on in Japan at the moment. But yeah, 2 weeks to catch up on. So I suppose we should get into it. Always remember that if you ever want to raise a topic that you want me to talk about, just do the @ Hiko Simon, and that'll make it flash orange. And I should notice the comment. It should be more prominent. And yeah, good to see you all anyway. And say hello if you're watching. It's always nice to see people and say hello back. But yeah, so let's get into the topics and see what we've got tonight. So the first thing is that the Japan government is passing a law to pass a new immigration law, which will basically expand the categories. At the moment, you have to be kind of a highly qualified, skilled, or very specific types of visas exist for foreigners at the moment. There are not general sort of blue collar or working visas just for regular jobs in Japan. However, unless you're married or you're here on some other sort of a visa. However, because of the labor shortages throughout the Japan economy that are now causing problems. Apparently, I was reading something today, actually, even companies that are like not in red ink are going out of business because they don't have the staff to carry on operations. So it's getting to such a point now that for critical areas that require more workers and want to have foreign workers, they're looking to increase the number of foreigners by about 340,000 in the next 5 years. Which is quite a big jump when you think that there are 2 million currently in Japan, and a big chunk of that 2 million, about a quarter of them are zainichis, of people who are born in Japan. So from an immigration perspective, it is a pretty substantial change. The public isn't quite sure about it. I think people understand the need. And that's probably where the 36% undecided comes from. However, you do have the disapprove, because people would just prefer everything not change if it cannot change, and 27% affirmatively approve, but most people just don't feel like they know enough to have an opinion, which is pretty typical in Japan. It is kind of funny how they always end up with an extra grey area of people who are not undecided. Maybe they just didn't understand the question, or maybe they started singing back to them or saying, "Pay me back my money, NHK," or something like that, but that's what you get. Pardon me. So yes, Japan expects 340,000 foreign workers after this bill passes. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that. They are talking about things considering, and this is where the opposition is trying to slow it down, as the opposition does. Not because well, not just to be an opposition party and block it per se, but because they're saying that there need to be more measures set up to ensure that there's proper integration. Because the experience, for example, with Brazilian Nikkei was that they were pretty much left on their own to figure out how to integrate, and it didn't work very well in a lot of places. Things like language lessons, things like social services. So at the moment, the government's just rushing to get this through and make it available, which is good, I suppose. If you want to come work in Japan, those visas are going to become available soon. But certainly the upper end. The forecast here is 5 years. In 5 years, they estimate that it should equate to about 340,000 extra foreigners that wouldn't have been here otherwise. Hey, Odie Jr., good to see you. Boom, indeed. the J-Vlog, you saw the vid on the robot restaurant, Chinese hot pot. It was very cool. I don't know what video you're talking about, but I'm glad it was cool. So yeah, we have right here is the Cybersecurity Minister, Mr. Sakurada. This is the thing about Japan that's very important, is that ministers are basically, it's like a merry-go-round where you become ministers of random ministries. You're not expected to really know or do anything about it. There are vice ministers who are basically like life tenure holding civil servants that basically actually run everything. Odie Jr., no, it was good that you made it in time. That's right, often you come in at the end, so glad you could wake up and join. Good to have you along here. So yeah, basically the way that the Japanese government works is that sometimes you almost get the feeling like they engineer scandals or whatever on purpose, just so that they can keep taking turns rotating around, basically catching bribes from the vested interests and sort of going around and, you know, representing the home, getting contracts for their home prefectures and their constituencies and whatever, getting some money back for their backers. And this is, I suppose, a good role in the sense that it's the role overseeing security for the Olympics, cybersecurity. So there's a lot of IT contracts and so on involved in it, and basically, but at least when people normally become ministers, like the Minister of Health or the Minister of Defense or whatever, they do explain that they have some credentials for it, they have some interest in it, something that actually makes and that is funny, that pops up on the screen faster than it pops up on my screen in the YouTube comments, which is pretty cool. And the Sergeant Bilko is absolutely right, and I'm getting to that. But normally, you know, the people try to at least pretend that they have some sort of qualification. Minister Sakurada from the LDP is fairly open about saying he doesn't use computers ever. You know, he basically he doesn't even type. I suppose, you know, and a lot of people said, oh, isn't this a joke? I mean, you know, how underqualified is he? But then I refer everyone, hey, Bill, it's good to see you. I refer all you skeptics back to the very first episode of Battlestar Galactica, the new series. When remember when the Cylons launched their cyber attack on the entire Battlestar fleet, the only Battlestar which survived, the Battlestar Galactica, survived because Captain Adama refused to connect it to networks. He required all the technology on board the ship be analog, and hence it survived the cyber attack. So I would say, you know, he could possibly be actually the smartest man in the room, although everything he has said since then, including asking whether he was asked whether he knows what a USB drive is, or whether there would be security measures about USB drives, and does he know what a USB drive is? And he says, yes, a USB drive is something you put a hole into it, right? Was his actual answer. So you know, again, prevention is better than cure. Abstinence, of course, is the best way to avoid diseases that come from certain things. But, you know, we all know how that generally works out. So, yeah, he's having a fun run, being in the spotlight, probably going to gather as many bribes and kickbacks for as long as possible, as long as he can go, and then pass the parcel on to somebody else. Nothing more secure than paper, so yes. In fact, yeah, I'm pretty sure you would have a go. In Japan, they call the old flip phones garake, and I'm pretty sure that would be the case. So yes, that's him. This is kind of cool. I didn't know that these existed, but this guy Nick Kapoor, he shared these, and there's a series of these pictures. So basically, when the Americans came to Japan, I wonder if I can find the the full series. Was it here? No. Nick Kapoor, this looks like a really cool Twitter account to follow, but basically the Americans are a bit like the North Koreans. You know how the North Koreans try to impress us by saying how, like, Kim Jong-un had played golf only once, but he hit 18 holes in one when he did. Well, apparently the Americans, when they first came into Japan and they wanted to impress everybody, they basically they described that these ended up as illustrations for the Japanese of how awesome the American leadership is. So, for example, here is George Washington with a bow and arrow, because he's pretty macho. Christopher Columbus. This is all pretty average stuff, but here is the incredibly jacked Benjamin Franklin firing a cannon that he holds with his bare hands while Adams directs him where to fire. That's pretty cool. You know, the Americans basically, I mean, that's like an Arnold Schwarzenegger from like the 19th century. you can understand. I mean, if you just take a movie poster of Arnold Schwarzenegger and said, "This is America," and this is President Trump, and you showed that to like a lost Amazonian tribe or something, yeah, they'd probably surrender right away. And this is what happened with Japan. Here, I mean, check this out. This is George Washington straight up punching a tiger. He's just punching that tiger, like, you know. Again, that's what. Don't mess. He's loco. You know, don't. You want a piece of this essay is pretty much what they're saying. And again, the Japanese, they ended isolation when they saw these pictures. Best buds John Adams must have had falling out because, oh geez, so they're all firing arrows at each other and fighting like bros do. But whoa, a huge snake ate John Adams' mum. I didn't know that was actually part of the actual story. So well, there you go. Pretty disturbing in some respects, but there again, I mean, John Adams like hand firing a cannon, and you know, George Washington punching a tiger, you know, with his bare knuckles. That's some pretty impressive stuff, and it's pretty much understandable that that's how things ended up. Put a hole in the drive and it'll be less prone to use by attackers. Well, Sergeant Booker, you have an excellent point. Yeah. So, and g'day Barrington, good to see you. So I thought that was pretty cool. This was just a photo I took of a sunset over Tokyo the other night, which I made into a small planet, and I thought it looked quite cool. So I'm sharing it, and isn't that neat? I met up with Simon from Three Old Dudes, Simon Chanoma. We went out for cupcakes. We were going to have, it was actually originally going to be other people, believe it or not, but it ended up just being me and him, so we just decided to try to look as tough as possible and eat cupcakes. The cupcakes were really good. So this place was in Shimokitazawa. If you look up Shimokitazawa cupcakes, you'll find the shop, and it's like a specialty cupcake artisan shop. The middle one there that I'm holding, that mofo right in the middle, that's like a semi-hardened marshmallow like cream on top of a chocolate marshmallow with solid chocolate on top. That marshmallow, that one right there, that is the best marshmallow, that is the best cupcake I have had in my entire life. Hey Andrea, good to see you, and finally over. Glad to hear that everything's over there. So yes, that was really good. So again, men comfortable in our masculinity, looking tough, eating cupcakes. That's what we do, and they were really nice. They were really good. So I highly recommend that if you ever want to come to Tokyo and check out the cupcakes, let me know. I'll take you there because they were good, and I want to go there again. The labour shortage, again, maybe they need to have visas for postal workers, because although I guess it'll be tough with the addresses and everything like that, but there are not enough post office workers to deliver post on Saturdays, and they're considering stopping having postal deliveries on Saturdays. Another sign of the times. YouTube Premium is now available in Japan, which reminds me, I'm probably going to get it myself. I mean, I watch enough YouTube that get rid of those stupid ads. So I'm probably going to do that, but anyway, that is coming into Japan, and yeah, I guess I'll check to see what kind of content they have, but that'll be pretty cool. Narcos, I've been watching the last 2 weeks. Probably what I've been doing more than anything else is I've watched Narcos, all 3 series in Colombia, the first 2 on Pablo Escobar, the second, the third one on the Cali Cartel, and the 4th one just came out a couple of weeks ago, Narcos Mexico. On the original Sinaloa cartel, or what became that. It's really good, and it's kind of funny because I mean, I majored in Spanish. I was better at Spanish than I was at Japanese when I first came to Japan, although I've forgotten all of it because I haven't used it in 20 years. So as a refresher for Spanish, and plus I've always actually I really like Mexican people, and I met some Colombians as well, and I mean, I realize when I say they know how to party in the context of talking about Narcos, I realize it sounds bad, but seriously, they are like the coolest people to hang out with. They have great food, they're really cool to hang out with, and yeah, I was kind of, I really enjoyed one. It was really well done. 2, it was great for refreshing my Spanish, even though I sound like a, well, I suppose I was learning Colombian narco trafficker Spanish, which basically it's really easy. You just put the word puto in front of like every single noun. to say effing, or you finish every sentence with pendejo, to call the guy an idiot or whatever. It was really fun. I tell you, I kind of felt the Spanish coming back with colourful new things. The funny thing about it is, though, I did realise the accents weren't that consistent. And remember, in Spanish they have accents as strong or even stronger than in English, and they take a lot of national pride in them. And so I must admit, it caused me to Google how good are these accents, because some of these are also fairly recognizable American TV actors. And yeah, you realize that they got a lot of actors, and then they said, yeah, try to talk like a Colombian, yeah, it didn't always work. Particularly Pablo Escobar is interesting in this series, although I thought his character was great, and the drama itself was very, very good. He's actually Brazilian. He's actually a Portuguese speaker, and apparently he was speaking with what to Colombians is an audible Brazilian accent when he was speaking as Pablo Escobar, which apparently kind of ruined it for the Colombians, which I understand. But yeah, I must say, I mean, it's really good, and the fact it's based on, it's basically like a drama documentary. I thought it was really, really good. Hey, John Anderson, good to see you from London. Welcome. London right now, where it is 1:53 p.m. So thank you for joining in the middle of your day. Hope you're enjoying this. Anyway, and Kenyan Kodos, good to see you. And yes, that's right. Glad to see that you're back and that you are a regular indeed. And so yeah, Narcos was awesome. I really, really enjoyed it, and I recommend it actually. So go check that out. This is an interesting stat. So there are now 80,000 volunteers signed up for the Olympics in 2020. However, of those 20,000, the number of, they've got it down the bottom here, 44% of those were non-Japanese. And it's kind of true. Japanese just really, there isn't really a big thing. There is a thing about NPOs, like organized organizations for the specific of doing non-profit work, but the idea of just like randomly volunteering for stuff doesn't really jive very well. The kind of walk-up volunteerism, I suppose you have to be completely in. Oh, good night, Andrea Mowbray. Have a good night there, and thank you for joining. And so in that context, it is a little bit perhaps not surprising that with the Olympics, where you wouldn't normally have trouble signing up volunteers, they've had trouble in Tokyo. And it's funny that, again, we only make up 1% of the population, foreign residents, and yet we're 44% of the volunteers for, the Tokyo Olympics, which, yeah, and I'm not one of them, by the way, although it would be pretty cool to do, and I realize that also. It's perhaps natural because they want people who speak foreign languages who are able to help international visitors, so it makes some sense. But, yeah, it's also maybe highlights a problem there. So we'll get into the Ghosn thing. Maybe I'll do a couple of other topics other than Ghosn, and then we'll talk about Ghosn with the time that's left, because that's a really, really big subject, and that's the main thing I want to talk about tonight. This is the one where, let me check the underlying tweet. Now this doesn't have the one from Wataru En, but basically this show, Where You Come From Japan, which recently featured Tikyo-san, which maybe those of you saw on Facebook. It's kind of funny, they interview foreigners. They walk around on the street, they find foreigners, and they randomly do fun interviews with them. However, of foreign visitors to Japan, you have to remember that like 80 or 90% come from Asian countries. Of the maybe 50% come from China. And yet on the show, something like 60 or 70% of the people featured on the show are from Europe or America, even though we're a very small portion of the actual tourists. Which goes to show, kind of, well, I guess it's hard perhaps to pick out Asian tourists sometimes, although it's not impossible, you can tell, but it does show that they are pushing a certain stereotype of foreigners that's not consistent with the reality, which is kind of what happens with Japanese TV. But yes, this is a really big one. This surprised me. Apparently a lot of companies now, now that smoking rates have decreased in Japan, there are companies that are specifically now banning smoking breaks. In my first job in IT in Japan, I used to go and join people on smoking breaks and not smoke, but just because I wanted the break, because they were making us work like 16, 17, 18-hour days sometimes. And I remember getting in trouble when I didn't go into the smoking room, when I just sat in the tea room and had a tea, and I was being told. I remember being challenged once by my boss, "Why are you taking a break?" And I said, "Well, I feel like a break. You guys are taking a break smoking." And he's like, "Well, we have a medical need to take a break. You don't. So, don't go slacking off taking a break." I'm kind of like, well, that's not fair. And I knew people, my dorkies, some of them took up smoking, partly in order to take breaks, and partly because there were important conversations that were happening in the smoking room. That tends to happen in these situations, and I didn't, but I considered it. Now perhaps with the smoking rates going down, yeah, it's an interesting situation where there are now companies that are basically recognizing that smoking breaks are eating into productivity, and they are not going to allow smoking breaks during, or any smoking during, working hours. Unthinkable when I first came to Japan, but perhaps a positive sign of the fact that less people are smoking and people feel more able to do this. You remember that university that I was talking about a few weeks ago, Tokyo Medical University, which actually adjusted the results, the entrance results for the entrance exam into this medical university to become doctors, basically because they wanted to regulate the number of women getting through. So they were purposely raising the bar to reduce the number of women that were getting through into medical school. Well, yeah, that school has been deregistered by the Ministry of... It's a private university, but it is a university with officially recognized degree. Well, the Ministry of Education is looking at now deregistering that university as a recognized university with recognized degrees. The first time that's ever happened, but just perhaps for those of you who... again, not to say that this is an isolated incident. What came out after this was that there were lots of schools doing this sort of thing as well. But if you thought this sort of thing was getting swept under the blanket and that nothing was going to get done about this, well, it looks like they're getting their ass solidly kicked now. They have gone back and they've attempted to try to rectify the situation by posthumously trying to recognize people who would have entered, who would have qualified for entry but were denied that because the results were fixed. But they're all really, really annoyed, and yeah, it looks like they've gone and done the right thing, and they've reduced that, so yeah. Mr. Cordy Champ, you're here to yell at Hiko for misrepresenting the New Zealand health system. Apparently the New Zealand health system isn't all publicly funded like Hiko falsely claimed. I betrayed us all. Well, I left in 1998. But how does that work? I thought it was publicly funded. It is pretty much free. I mean, how does that work? They've got the what do they call them? The regional hospitals work like businesses, but they're all government run and they are funded by tax. So, Mr. Cordy Chair, please feel free to correct me on that. And are you in New Zealand and are you getting a doctor? Is that it? Certainly during the 1990s, they did go through a lot of reforms where they became government owned but privately operated, something like that. They had to be operated for for profit, but there we go. It's possible that I betrayed you all, but certainly, you know, compared to the American system of fully privatized, it's not like that at all. Bradley Ford, good to see you, and yes indeed, checking in from icy cold but beautiful St. Petersburg. Wow, you're in Russia. Welcome, Bradley Ford, and hoping that all is well in Leningrad, and to everyone watching this, welcome, comrades. Yes, all very good. So Mr. Cordy Chip received complaints from a New Zealander about the expense of visiting a GP to get a script for flu medication. Or maybe they changed it. I mean, seriously, we went bankrupt like during the 80s, and I know that we privatized it. It was still pretty cheap when I left, but that was 20 years ago, so I could totally be wrong about that. New Zealand welfare is partially funded by Australia. Well, that's not true. Don't get me started, Berenger. You know that, true fact, all the New Zealanders on social welfare in Australia, all of that gets paid for by the New Zealand government and New Zealand taxpayers, even though New Zealanders in Australia actually have a lower rate of unemployment than Australians and on average earn more money than Australians. The few that do end up requiring social welfare assistance in Australia, all of that gets invoiced to the New Zealand government and New Zealand pays for all of it. So Australia doesn't actually pay anything for New Zealanders on welfare, even though they think they do, and they think that we're bludgers, but we're not, we do pay for it ourselves, so there we go. But there we go, scold me please. And believe me, if you're looking for someone who says that New Zealand's perfect on everything, we're definitely not. And we get our ass kicked by Australia, actually. I mean, that was an unwinding of CER that the Australians did that. It was just a political stunt, you know, to sort of make it look like they were being tough on New Zealand. But there we go, so, yeah, and I don't care, I've lived in Japan for 20 years now. So, yes, what else have we got here? I don't know if you guys have seen this, but this is really cool. If it was this called Bookseller Honda-san. I've kind of seen these floating around on Facebook and stuff like that. Have you guys seen this series? It's basically a skeleton who works in a manga shop, and he has various interactions, often with foreign manga fans and so on. And it's in Japanese, but there are some international versions of it, and it's really, really good. Gizmodo featured it, just saying that it's a really cool way to learn about Japanese comic culture. And yeah, it's these are the gay comics, but it's kind of funny. Just it's basically a kind of random but quite well done quite a well done series about Japanese manga shop culture. And yeah, I've seen a few of them, and actually it's kind of funny that the word seems to be getting round about them. So it's definitely worth checking out if you haven't seen it. Skeleton Honda Bookseller, I think is what it's called in English, and you can find bilingual versions of it, and it is quite good. I think we're going to come to Ghosn now. There isn't much else. I guess the last one I'm going to say for non-Ghosn related news is Osaka 2025 World Expo. To tell you the truth, when I was a kid, I remember there was the Barcelona Expo, and there was the Expo in Brisbane, which got a lot of attention. And in New Zealand, they always pay a lot of attention to this, because New Zealand is like basically considers it New Zealand, where New Zealand gets to be one of the rides. So we used to have TV shows featuring it. I don't really know what's happened to the World Expo for the last like 20 or 30 years, but apparently it is coming back in 2025. And just as perhaps the World Expo perhaps plays second fiddle a little bit to events like the Olympics and whatnot, Osaka, the faithful, ever the faithful Robin to Tokyo's Batman. Tokyo gets the Olympics in 2020, and Osaka just got the World Expo, baby, in 2025. Good for them. Good for them. Good for you, Robin. Keep up the good work. Osaka, by the way, not actually the second biggest city in Japan. It's the third biggest. They always say that they're the second biggest, but actually the second biggest city in Japan is Yokohama, which technically is a suburb of Tokyo, which is why Osakans don't like to recognize it, but it is. It's got like 4 or 5 million people. What is it, like 4 million people? And Osaka's got 3 million people. But yes, it looks like they're going to build a new artificial island for it, and it should actually be pretty sweet. And actually, for me as well, I would love to get down there to see it. So, holy crap, Bradley Ford was in Siberia. Wow. You must be in oil or gas or something like that to go out there. I would actually love to go there, but not during this time of year. Like, definitely summertime is when I'd like to go, but that's pretty cool. So yeah, anyway, Osaka, congratulations, you've got the World Expo 2025, and they should put on a pretty good show, I'd hope. And you never know, they might have the maglev going all the way, yeah, they'll be pushing it to get it all the way down to Osaka in time, but it'd be pretty cool if they have the maglev going at least past Nagoya by then, so that'd be pretty cool. The last story I'm going to talk about before we get on to Ghosn is this, from today's news. Taiwan had a referendum on giving LGBT people the right to vote. LGBT people the right to marry, and it turns out when they did that by public referendum, the Taiwanese people in this public referendum decided, yeah, no. And I don't know, on the one hand, if it all goes well, it's a great feel-good sort of a project, and it makes it really hard, of course. Barry Bonds, I'm guessing you're somewhere that it's legal, and congratulations to you for doing that. Well, sorry, Freudian slip in terms of voting, because the point I kind of want to make about this is that if you ask me, this is really about civil rights and human rights in a way. And the fact that they're putting it to a referendum, like I say, it all goes very well if it goes well, then the fact that everyone voted for it just makes it even harder for anyone politically to oppose it, and that was probably the idea. It was probably a bit of a stunt. You know, a bit like voting for whether to leave Europe or something else that you don't actually intend to do, but you just mean it for a stunt to get political leverage, without any risk ever of that possibly going wrong or backfiring on you. Well, in Taiwan they did this with gay marriage rights, and the story in Taiwan is that this has become a thing in Taiwan because the Supreme Court of Taiwan recently in a court case actually found that it was discriminatory to not allow the civil marriage rights to LGBT couples. So Taiwan became, by virtue of this court case, from the first country in Asia to, on a national level, Japan recognizes it at municipal level, but on a national level to recognize gay marriage, same-sex marriage. And it seems like they wanted to, you know, at the moment there is a liberal, the Democrats who are pro-independence. They're relatively liberal within Taiwan, are currently in power there. They've had their equivalent of the midterm elections. They put this up for referendum just to sort of formalize the legalization of this, and the referendum voted no. So yeah, oh, pardon me. I think in a way, I mean, having a referendum on giving basically what was found by the court to be a human right, something that should be the same for everybody. But granted, I mean, LGBTQ are a small portion of the population, but the idea that the majority, that they're having equal human rights to the rest of the population, is subject to the majority deeming them worthy. I mean, what do you do? Do you start to have referendums on whether Indian people are allowed to buy ice cream? Do you make that subject to the approval of the majority of the population? It's kind of like, no, they should be able to, you know, to me, I realize that this is a change. It's a legal change and a social change. And people want to make sure that they're not necessarily doing this out of sync with the public will, but the rationale that is being recognized is not that, you know, we should legalize, you know, raising the speed limit. We're talking about recognizing that you know, as a matter of human rights, that it's wrong to discriminate against this minority's ability to have marriages the same as same-sex. The main argument that you hear against that I often hear get raised against same-sex marriage is the idea that you know, marriage as an institution is for procreation. But there again, there are lots of couples that can't have children, that don't have children, and in that case, or that choose not to have children. And in that case, I mean, really, what's the difference? So to me, this is a total no-brainer, and they shouldn't have put it up for a referendum, and it's kind of not making them look very good right now. In Tokyo, they haven't taken referendums on this when they've had the local wards in Tokyo recognize it. So yeah. And there are precedents as well. I mean, in Australia, when they decided to allow Aboriginals to vote in the 72, I don't think they did a referendum for that. The Labour government did change. They did check to see who they'd vote for first, and confirm that they would get the votes if they legalised it. But they did that. South Africa, of course, they ended apartheid by a referendum, and that should be remembered as well. That was the minority whites were recognising majority rule. But they did that by recognition, I mean, essentially dismantling apartheid by a referendum, and they did the right thing in that case. But I don't know about, you know, the idea that you are making people's rights subject to something, especially something which is subject to, for example, religious beliefs and morality. It was probably fraught with trouble when they did this, and I don't think that human rights should ever be subject to, you know. And what are you going to do next? You're going to have a referendum on killing the firstborn of certain minorities? I mean, it's a human right. They should either have it or they don't have it. And the court's already said that they should have it. So disappointing, Taiwan, but is what it is. You know, I think it shows that they took the wrong approach. And by the way, the government which proposed this referendum got their ass kicked throughout. They lost a lot of seats as well. So people, it looks like, were just sort of backlashing. This tends to happen in midterms. So yes, you have that. And exactly, Quinn, I sort of agree, you know. How do you make sure that the right are not subject to the majority whim? I mean, why should they make this subject to the majority of people who it doesn't directly affect? You know, especially when it's the right thing to do. So yes, those are all the topics that I have, but let's get into, in that case, Ghosn. So what happened with Ghosn? As you may have, as I'm sure you've heard, Carlos Ghosn, the CEO of Renault and of Nissan, was suddenly detained earlier this week. When he was detained, the CEO, I believe Saikawa is his name, is the CEO of Nissan. So Carlos Ghosn was the chairman of Nissan, the Kaicho, the company president, as opposed to the CEO that was the Japanese CEO of Nissan. He immediately came and called a press conference in which he basically said, you know, we found evidence through an internal whistleblower of extensive wrongdoing relating to salary by Carlos Ghosn. He was collecting vastly more income than he was declaring and paying taxes on. And in the amount of $30-something million in various benefits, and compensation, which was not declared, and the company and the board was not aware of this, and he had deceived the company, and this was misconduct, which the company decided to cooperate with authorities, and the authorities decided to act, and they promptly arrested him. And on the same night that he was arrested, the CEO came in and basically threw him under the bus and said, "Can't believe what this guy did." And so Carlos Ghosn is now in jail, and he's gone into a hole that pretty much, when you get detained in Japan, you don't get access to a lawyer. They can hold you for weeks. The idea that confessions in most Western common law jurisdictions, it's generally about 72 hours, about 3 days. That if you're detained and interrogated for 3 days, there's a presumption that based on history that even innocent people will confess after about 3 days, just from the stress of the situation. In Japan, they can keep you for weeks, and they rely on confession, as the main way of, rather than investigation, as the main way of convicting people. Hence the 99% conviction rate. So this is interesting. They basically, and it seems plausible, they pointed out, the company was shocked. They were shocked to find out that the chairman of Nissan and Renault at the same time, but as the chairman of Nissan, that Nissan had funded not only his corporate housing in somewhere in Ginza, I think, in Tokyo, but also 3 other houses in France, Brazil, and Lebanon. That the company had paid for a yacht club membership in Rio de Janeiro. Of course, Carlos Ghosn, originally born in Brazil to Lebanese parents and French citizen, so he sort of makes sense from a personal perspective why he'd want to have places there, but they were all paid for by the company. Japanese also particularly sensitive about compensation. For all the wrongdoing you can do, the idea of getting paid too much is something that can be hard for Japanese people to forgive. So, it looks basically like, on face value, that they caught Carlos with his hand in the till, and they promptly reported it, turned him over to the police, who promptly arrested him. And that all seems to be that very simple and straightforward and disappointing. Yesterday, a few days after he was arrested, he was dismissed as chairman, as well as his main advisor, who was also detained. It appears that for now, Nissan looks like it's going back to pretty much running itself under its old Japanese management, and they're going to figure out some way to recover without their dastardly criminal boss. End of story. Well, not exactly. There's been a lot going on in the background leading up to this, and it's always the case in Japan. Nothing is ever quite as simple as it seems. Certainly, if this was a straight up, case of misappropriation, there have been scandals. There have been the accounting scandals with Toshiba, Olympus, Mitsubishi Motors, over and over, all these different scandals. Generally speaking, the police here, they do not move quickly. It takes a long time to process. And as more information has come out, what's come out is that it appears that the company, an internal whistleblower, sort of found this wrongdoing of Carlos Ghosn about 6 months ago, and that they took about 6 months investigating and setting this up before he was finally basically sprung. The other thing that was happening during these 6 months, however, is that Carlos Ghosn, who, although Renault is the majority shareholder of Nissan, it doesn't directly control Nissan. They're separate companies, and he is the first CEO apparently ever in history to be a CEO of 2 Forbes 500 companies at the same time, and he was basically a CEO or chairman of both Renault and this company at the same time. And apparently what was happening was Renault, Ghosn was basically maneuvering to actually towards a full merger of Nissan and Renault, which the people at Nissan did not approve of, they did not want. And so, understanding that he was moving around in the background to merge the two companies, this does look a little bit like, and there are a lot of signs, even in Japanese media, talking about that this was basically a planned coup, basically by Japanese executives who did not want to be taken over by Renault fully, who basically looked for dirt on the guy, found it, and turned it over to authorities and got him arrested right before Another twist in the tale came yesterday when both Ghosn, basically the police always after a few days detention will say they'll publish whatever they're talking about in their interrogations, normally to add the pressure onto them. And they released that both this guy and another guy, his advisor, Kelly, I think is his name, have both denied wrongdoing. This guy, Greg Kelly, he's gone through and said that basically everything relating to his compensation, this guy was the guy who handled. And he said that everything went through auditors, external legal counsel, everything was properly done above board and was properly approved and so on. Interesting as well that the company was able to pay for these extra houses and so on, using a British Virgin Islands, a tax haven company, which technically under the company law in Japan, Japanese companies are not allowed to set up, so Nissan itself could get into trouble for that. But yeah, it looks like basically they're pushing back and saying that no, they did everything that they were supposed to do, at least to cover themselves. There are also news articles coming out today by accountants and so on saying that the burden of proof to prove criminality with regards to the way that some of these things are being handled probably hasn't been met. I.e., they looked for something to get them on. They found what they thought was the best thing, but there's a lot of people questioning, one, whether they've actually got a solid case against them or not, and two, whether this was really just a political move by the Nissan board to prevent itself getting taken over by Renault. And it seems to have succeeded for now, at least in that Ghosn, apart from being in jail, and probably going to be in jail for about a month now, they also unanimously had a board meeting vote the other day to fire him as chairman, so he's now been fired, regardless of the outcome of the investigation. So yeah, basically everything's a bit up in the air right now. It is interesting that I must admit, when I saw it, I thought, well, the story about the illegal compensation sounds plausible and it sounds greedy, just like the chairman or the CEO of Nissan, who was basically throwing him under the bus on the day that he was arrested, was saying it was. I was kind of thinking to myself, well, it sounds plausible that he got caught, trying to claim too much money, inappropriately. But at the same time, he's clearly been, done in. This is clearly a coup d'etat at the same time. But it looks like not only is this a coup d'etat, but they might not have even actually got him for something legit, which will be super interesting actually if they don't. I mean, the police, when they make an arrest, 99% conviction rate, they're pretty much committed to seeing it through when they decide to detain him. And it sounds like they did set this up for 6 months, so they must have felt solid with what they had. The police, I think they said that some analysis I've read in here says that they think that they've got him basically on something as serious or more serious, for example, than insider trading. Insider trading in Japan by trading houses was legal, at least until a couple of years ago. In fact, it's how Daiwa and Nomura made a lot of their money, by giving inside information to their favorite investors. It's actually stuff that you go to jail for in America. In Japan, it's legal. So comparing it to that is also kind of a bit of a joke. So yeah, there's all these conspiracy theories. I've seen people saying that, oh, they did this to him because he's a gaijin. That kind of comes into it, but it's probably then worth coming back into the whole story about Ghosn, which I actually read today. He wrote a pardon me, a bit of a self-congratulatory autobiography, which appears still on the Nissan US website. 10 chapters written by Ghosn himself about his life story. And it's kind of interesting, especially in the context that he's currently in jail. And yes, we had the cupcakes earlier, Simon Lochanoma, and they were very, very good, and thank you for joining. So his life story is actually really interesting, how he came up, how basically he was, he went to school in France, he became an engineer, he joined Michelin, did well, ran the Brazilian business for Michelin, came back to France, in fact then went to America, and became number 2 in Michelin, then was headhunted for Renault, turned Renault around in Europe, and then was sent to Japan when Renault acquired majority shareholding in Nissan, and the big turnaround that he did in Nissan. And he tells the story about all of those things. Certainly the story with Japan was, I mean, he came to Japan the same time I did, 1999, and Nissan was in the crapper. I mean, it was doing really poorly. It was had a lot of debt. as a business, and it was one of these sort of classic cases that it needed to sort of do drastic cuts that no one internally had the will to sort of do. And he came in and basically through modification of Nissan's supply chain, which is to say most Japanese companies, you know, have these really tight family type relationships with their entire supply chains, and they're not like single companies, they're like multiple companies, like whole communities of companies that are dependent upon these aggregating manufacturers. And Ghosn came in and said, you know, everything was a clean slate. They would only be choosing suppliers based on price and quality. Basically sort of cleaned everything out. And this was kind of devastating for the whole Nissan supply chain, but at the same time he made it clear it was to save the company itself, and that eventually if the company became healthy again, they would be able to increase the number of suppliers that they use. But the dramatic cost cutting that he came in and did in Japan, although it saved the company, you would assume, and the story is that you'll often see, is that he came and saved Nissan, which I don't doubt that he did. But if you think that people appreciated him for saving the company, no, they didn't. Basically, I knew people in Nissan, or people who had worked in Nissan, and in Japanese media, there were blogs going around at the time that people really resented the reforms that he made, the restructuring which he did at Nissan, which saved the company and now made it. They've just overtaken Toyota as I think the second biggest car manufacturer in the world. So they're doing well, and no question it worked. But the cuts and reforms that saved the business there were pretty hard to take for a lot of people there, and there was a lot of resentment going a long way back. The idea that he was loved by the entire company was no people. He refers in his own autobiography to the song as well. There was a song by Urufus, Ashitagaru, which is kind of like a salaryman workers song, and there's a verse in the chapter in this long song about the struggles of salarymen, saying that my new boss is a Frenchman and I can't even communicate with him with body language, but this is a new chance to start over again, is one of the themes of the song which he refers to there. But yeah, it was kind of a big thing that there was this big sort of, you know, French cost cutter, Brazilian Lebanese as it turns out. But he did certainly cause a bit of a ruckus when he came in here. And there were certainly people suggesting that the fact that he was a foreigner and he came in and he kind of, you know, upset all of these apple carts, is part of the belief that certainly, you know, did this happen because he was a foreigner? He probably wouldn't have been in this position if he was Japanese. The whole point was that the Japanese management of Nissan were paralyzed from being able to make the cuts that they needed to make to save the company, and he came in and he did them. You know, could it have been done another way or whatever? Perhaps, but certainly Nissan's done very well under his leadership, although again, people I know from within the company, or that I've talked to over the years, would not give Ghosn the credit for the success that's come after, but I'd say it's probably not fair as well to deny him, you know, some of the credit for the success, certainly, and certainly some of the radical changes were his doing. So you could say that he's kind of, you know, looking at this negatively, it looks like an assassination. It looks like he's been basically, you know, he served his purpose of saving the company, and just when he looks like he's about to go too far and have Renault take the company over completely, they did him in right at the right moment. And on the other hand, there's also the story that, well, you know, it looks like he's a particularly power-hungry, greedy CEO who went a little bit too far, set up a British Virgin Islands company to pay himself extra compensation, basically to Nissan, paying him for 4 luxury houses, a yacht club membership, and $35 million extra compensation that wasn't reported to the tax authorities. Both may be true, although I guess we're going to find out as time goes on. Certainly, it'll be really interesting if they don't make the case on this guy. What do you do after this? I mean, certainly he's been done in pretty thoroughly by this, and yeah, and no question that the whistleblower was probably the CEO. It was probably the Japanese people. Certainly, the Japanese part of the company, it looks like, fully cooperated on this. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. Yes, I'm not going to write this off purely as an assassination because he's a foreigner, but certainly the conspiracy theory that this was being done to head off a move by Renault and a move of him becoming the president of both companies at the same time that does make sense. I also initially pretty much face value just believed all the charges, but it is interesting. He's been under pretty heavy detention and questioning, as has Greg Kelly, and they've both come out saying no, everything's above board, everything was signed off, everything was done properly, check the books. So I'm actually really curious to see who were the advisors, and if they were getting advice, could they reasonably rely upon it. So yeah, a lot more to see what that will happen with this story, and whether he can be given a fair trial, especially with technically he's only got a 1% chance of surviving if they decide to actually formally charge him, which by the way they haven't actually done yet. They're still just interrogating him, although that means holding him in detention for weeks. So yeah, that's all the topics that I've got. As you can see, my throat's a bit messed up. I've barely gotten through the hour, so I don't know, I guess I could play a tune with some of the extra time. Maybe I'll play a quick tune, and that'll be it for tonight. But good to see you all. Sorry I couldn't make it last week. Let's do that. Let's do a bit of an outro track. Set up the old cork. I haven't done this for a while. So if I do this, it means I will want to plug this in, and see if I can get this set up right. Hey SDF, don't worry, you can watch the recorded version, which I hope you do. Let's see if I can get this set up right. Boom. Oh, there we go. Looking good. Let's do a new track. That's right. I could actually record one of these sometime. So give me a musical style, and we'll do that for the outro. In fact, let's let's pick a beat. Okay. Let's do that. That's nice. Hey, the J Vlog. 2.5 Yojis, I don't know, it's just really hard doing it on Saturdays, to tell the truth. I haven't talked with Victor for a while. We will do it once in a while, but it's hard to do every weekend, so we'll see what I can do with that. Quite a nice little melody with the hook here. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the show, and don't forget, come back next week. I'll be back here every week, and more topics, more updates on the Ghosn story. And see you all soon. Ka kite anō. Peace. See ya. Peace. Have a good night.